Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are actually talking about Facebook because Facebook has been deleting evidence about possible extremist groups. This is a little alarming, but it actually brings up some really interesting questions. This is coming from the Washington Post, and here's what's going on. Now, as a backstory here, in June of last year, 2020, a group of men, basically in camouflage, like fatigues and all of that, armed with military-style rifles, confronted protesters who wanted to basically remove a statue of a Spanish conquistador in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Shots were fired. Protester was wounded. Obviously, arrests were made. The alleged shooter was not actually a member of this group, which calls themselves the New Mexico Civil Guard, but prosecutors blame the New Mexico Civil Guard for fomenting the violence and sought a civil injunction to bar it from acting as a paramilitary organization at future public demonstrations. Basically, the case hit a snag because Facebook's own crackdown on extremist groups was a problem. Prosecutors are demanding that Facebook hand over data that would confirm the identity of group members and page administrators, but Facebook says those records no longer exist because they deleted them after they banned the organization as part of an August 2020 content moderation sweep. Basically, they found them to be extremists, they killed them, basically killed off their page and all of that, and then just deleted the data. Now, in an era when extremist groups are obviously organizing online constantly, we've seen that continuously, these legal showdowns highlight a tension between the pressure that digital platforms face to remove problematic accounts on one hand, and basically on the other, the authorities' interest in accessing that information for their actual prosecutions. It raises questions about what privacy protections, if any, those platforms, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc., basically owe to the people and the organizations they have banned. Now, this dispute echoes another ongoing legal battle, interestingly enough, in which the African nation of Gambia is pressing Facebook to release deleted account records as part of an international human rights claim against the organizers, of Myanmar's ethnic cleansing campaign against the Rohingya Muslims. I've actually talked about that here on this podcast/video, that essentially Facebook aided and abetted genocide by allowing demonstrably false information on that group, the Rohingya Muslims, to essentially go spread like wildfire in Myanmar, which obviously caused pogroms against that population. Now, in September, a federal magistrate in Washington, D.C. ordered Facebook to comply, ruling that federal privacy laws don't apply to social media accounts once the platform has suspended or banned them. Legal scholars and online privacy experts say these cases and others expose the shortcoming of federal privacy laws written at a time when email was basically the hot new digital communication technology, and point to a need for legislation that addresses the retention of user records in the social media age. We'll be talking about that soon because that is a really good point. Now, this past Monday, the district attorney for Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, took the unusual step of asking a court in California, where Facebook is located, to force the company to comply with its subpoena for basic account information regarding the members and membership of the New Mexico Civil Guard group. The New Mexico Civil Guard organized, recruited, taught paramilitary tactics, and guided members' actions via Facebook, according to prosecutors. Now, if Facebook really does delete all traces of these kinds of groups when it takes down their pages, that obviously calls into question how serious Facebook actually is about preventing them from resurfacing on the platform, let alone aiding real-world investigations into extremists. So think about it this way. If I am basically running a page that Facebook bans because they think I'm an extremist and they delete all of my accounts, what's stopping me from creating just another page with another name and doing the exact same thing? Basically, now they're playing whack-a-mole with me if they're not retaining that information. And I think that is a really good point this article brings up from the Washington Post. Now, Facebook pointed out that it does offer a clear process by which authorities can request that the company preserve data that might be relevant to investigations, as long as they do so in a timely manner. Facebook, though, should know that records related to organizations and people it deems dangerous under its quote-unquote real-world harm policy are, almost by definition, likely to be of interest to authorities and should preserve them accordingly. Authorities can't always know at the beginning of an investigation exactly what records are going to need or who all the suspects or possible groups are until the investigations are ongoing, ideally concluded. Now, that's according, for the record, that logic is according to Mary McCord of Georgetown University's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. Now, this group has aided basically the Virginia case for an injunction against several groups who participated in the deadly 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. That's where Heather Heyer was killed, if you recall that. That was just a complete horrific mess. But in terms of that retention, there is a flip side to that, and that's the privacy side. Asking social networks to permanently store data on deleted accounts is essentially tantamount to surveillance overreach. The privacy rights of peoples whose communications are stored online are actually defined federally by the Stored Communications Act, which is part of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986. That's right. This was done under the Reagan era when email was used by 10,000 of us. I was an early adopter, but, there you go. In the Reagan era is essentially the laws that we are trying to apply to Facebook. That act was designed around email providers that acted as conduits of information, not social networks that actively police their platforms. Meaning, I can send out the most incendiary email, whatever I want, and my email provider, back in the day, at that point, it probably would have been like Prodigy or AOL, really isn't liable for that. They're not policing those emails. So essentially, this is silent on the status of accounts or posts that have been removed for policy violations, like the New Mexico Civil Guard. And I think this really opens up very interesting balances here, because obviously Facebook is a private corporation. Yes, they've got shares and all of that, but they're not a government entity, meaning they can act in a manner that they see fit, whether we agree with that manner or not. So they could retain all of this data indefinitely for as long as they want, or like most organizations that have large cloud infrastructure that is continuously growing and consuming space, they've got a very short retention time, and then it basically retentions out, becomes free space as people continue to upload pictures of their dinner or their kids or whatever it is, or stream videos and all of that. And so by virtue of that, the preservation in the long term also possibly harms the ability for Facebook to reuse space in their ever-growing infrastructure presence, and that's something that we need to take into consideration. At the same token, if Facebook is doing these content moderation sweeps and they are flagging and finding organizations that they believe are potentially in violation, whether it's extremism or something else, then basically there needs to be a preservation standard that Facebook has for a limited period of time. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years before it's retentioned out. And maybe, the police never come knocking, prosecutors never come knocking, and it simply goes away, but it's there as a grace period just in case. Now, the other thing I want to point out too is that there is, I think, a very clear line between what extremism is and what free speech and free expression is. A lot of people will say, well, these people have every right to say what they want to say. And the answer to that is, yeah, they completely do. I completely believe that the New Mexico Civil Guard can say whatever they want, with the exception of fomenting violence. That's the difference. If I come to you and say basically, or on a Facebook group, I hate the government, I think they have bad policies, I'm not a fan of the current president or the past president or whatever it is, or maybe I absolutely love them. The difference is me saying, you know what, let's have a debate, let's talk about the policies, I think they stink and here's why, versus I hate the government, let's all go get some guns and intimidate people, or, potentially take the government down. Or at the same token, I love the government so much and people hate the government, let me take up arms and go shoot the people that hate it. And when we are looking at the backdrop of the current political divide in this country, and I don't care, what side of this you're on, this is something that I think causes issues. Right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, we are in day 2 of deliberations of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where basically there is footage of Kyle Rittenhouse shooting 3 people. Was it self-defense? Was he a vigilante? Et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to leave that up to you, but understand that whatever that verdict is, and this is where I'm going, is whether he is guilty or not guilty per the jury, these kinds of things are going to ramp up violence. And by virtue of that, if we have social media basically saying, or Facebook groups that are saying, yes, let's all show up to Kenosha because if it's not guilty, we're going to burn this down. Or another group that says, yeah, we're all going to show up to Kenosha, and if he is guilty, we're going to burn this all down. that is something that is deeply concerning beyond the fact of you saying, oh, well, he shouldn't be guilty because of blah, 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 or he should be guilty because of this, and having an open and honest debate. There is a line between free expression and violence and the cause of that. And that's a very fine line, I think, oftentimes. So if you are encouraging as a group people basically to get violent against anything, that goes beyond, let's say, the terms and conditions of Facebook, but it also goes beyond the terms and conditions of free speech in the sense that you also can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So there you go. That's actually constitutional law as decided by the Supreme Court. So I think this is an interesting issue. I am not 100% sure where this should go. I don't think Facebook should be able to store everything and anything they want to indefinitely, because obviously that's a data mining privacy violation, especially if I cancel my account and I ask them to close it and delete my information. But at the same token, extremism is one thing, and should there be a grace period for that for a specific time? Sure. The question is how long. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, but that is your news of the day. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, where hopefully none of us are part of extremist groups. And please feel free to follow me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, everyone.